In July 1919, Detective Sergeant Patrick Smith was shot dead in Drumcondra. This was the first time a man had been killed on the orders of Michael Collins. Smith had arrested Pyrrhus Beasley a few weeks previous, and Pyrrhus was carrying many incriminating documents. He was going to be tried in court. Collins sent word to Smith not to testify against him. However, Smith ignored the warning and sealed his fate. And so a 4-man team was sent to intercept him as he made his way home from work. Smith stepped off a tram and was shot 4 times with a revolver, but somehow he managed to remain standing and run to his home. Smith survived in hospital for 5 weeks before finally dying. And the attack revealed a crucial flaw. The .38 caliber revolvers used were not powerful enough, and so Collins and his men learned from this, and afterwards they always carried .45 caliber weapons. In response to the shooting, Dublin Castle banned Sinn Féin, and Collins used this to outmaneuver the more moderate Sinn Féin members. They no longer had the ability to temper the more aggressive and militant tactics that Collins favoured. It was then decided that a unit of volunteers should be formally established who were devoted to targeting spies and informers. In September 1919, a meeting was held in Parnell Square, attended by Richard Mulcahy, the IRA's Chief of Staff, and Dick McKee, head of the IRA's Dublin Brigade. The rest of the IRA men were picked from across the city, and Collins made them an offer. They would leave their jobs and take a wage from the IRA, and they would tell no one, within the army or outside it, of their duties, and they answered to Collins alone. There would be no independent operations, and every hit had to be sanctioned by Collins. There would also be an active service unit consisting of men from the Tipperary and Dublin Brigade, which would work in tandem with them on a variety of different operations. Almost immediately, they began their work. The notorious squad was now formally established. They began scouting suspects and picking off their targets, focusing primarily on threats within the G Division of the Dublin Metropolitan Police. In the meantime, however, Collins wanted to strike a spectacular blow against prominent members of the British establishment. He devised a plan to kill Lord French as he stood on the review stand at College Green during an Armistice Day march. However, when the operation was put before the GHQ, it was vetoed by Cathal Brugh, who feared that it could endanger civilian bystanders. But the following month, Collins received intelligence that Lord French would be returning to Dublin from his Roscommon estate by train, and so he dispatched an augmented squad of 14 men, with Dan Breen, Sean Tracy, Sean Hogan and Martin Savage among them. Armed with revolvers and grenades, they cycled out to Ashtown Railway Station, close to the Phoenix Park. During the ambush, IRA volunteer Martin Savage was killed, and Lord French managed to escape. Irish Independent published an editorial titled "A Deplorable Outrage," and they condemned the actions of the IRA as murder most foul. In response, Collins sent a squad of 30 IRA volunteers to the offices of the Irish Independent, armed with sledgehammers, crowbars and revolvers, and the editor of the newspaper and his staff members were held at gunpoint while the volunteers destroyed their printing presses. By the end of 1919, the squad had utterly decimated the G Division. Out of its original 19 detectives, 3 of them were dead, 1 was permanently disabled, 4 had retired, and 5 transferred to non-political police work. So throughout the following year of 1920, the British would repeatedly attempt to rejuvenate their intelligence network through new measures and new attempts to identify and capture the mastermind behind the IRA's intelligence war, Michael Collins. In the meantime, however, Collins wanted to use the squad to settle some old scores. See, during the Easter Rising of 1916, the young Michael Collins witnessed an event that would remain with him forever. He saw a British Army officer, Lee Wilson, taking away Sean McDermott's walking stick and forcing him to walk for 2 miles without it to Richmond Barracks. Along the way, McDermott was beaten with batons and forced to keep pace with the other volunteers on their march. Lee Wilson was shot dead by the squad on Michael Collins' orders in June 1920. And that same year, Sinn Féin Lord Mayor of Cork, Thomas McCurtain, was shot dead on his 36th birthday in front of his wife and son by a group of RIC men with blackened faces. Collins's men managed to break the secret codes used by the RIC and learn the names of those who had taken part in the assassination. They learned that RIC District Inspector Oswald Swanzy ordered the attack on McCurtain. And so Collins ordered the squad to hunt him down. Oswald Swanzy was shot dead with McCurtain's own revolver while leaving a church in the north of Ireland in August 1920. Collins's philosophy was quite ruthless, and he took a hardline approach to informers. Anyone who gave information, even if it was given under torture, was liable to be shot. This is because he understood that informers were detrimental to any campaign, and you had to be utterly ruthless in dealing with them. And the British were impressed with the ability of Collins and his squad to disrupt their experienced intelligence operations, and he became the most wanted man in Ireland. But that never stopped him from adhering to his principle of hiding in plain sight. The IRA's intelligence network became a serious problem for the British, prompting the Special Branch in London to send 60 men to Ireland, including Digby Hardy, who was a seasoned fraudster with a long criminal record. Hardy convinced Lord French of his apparent knowledge of the IRA, and he was released from prison and he joined Combined Intelligence Service in Dublin Castle in May 1920. He was tasked with capturing or killing Michael Collins, and he attempted to worm his way into Collins's inner circle. But Hardy was unaware that the IRA had already gained an extensive file on his past. So Collins arranged for Hardy to meet with what he believed was the IRA's inner circle, but in reality, they were international journalists, with Arthur Griffith among them. At this meeting, Hardy spun a false story and admitted that he was a British agent, but he offered to work as a double agent for the IRA. Griffith exposed him by reading aloud his criminal record. Hardy was shaken and humiliated, and he was given an ultimatum: leave Ireland within 24 hours or face the consequences. And he fled that same night. And the incident became a propaganda victory for the IRA, and it embarrassed the British intelligence system for employing such criminals and rogues. The rest of the 60 agents that had been brought over were gradually getting inside the mind of the IRA. At first, they took their time familiarising themselves with Dublin, and they often mingled at the Cario Cafe near Grafton Street. But occasionally, they struck with sudden ferocity. John Lynch was a Sinn Féin councillor from Limerick who had come to Dublin to give £23,000 in subscription money to Michael Collins, and he was assassinated in a Dublin hotel by one of Dublin Castle's new spies. Collins's contacts within Dublin Castle were growing fearful that the Cario gang were getting close to Collins and his men. They were becoming increasingly effective, and by the 9th of November 1920, Lloyd George boasted that he had murder by the throat in Ireland. And Collins felt that a net was beginning to close in around him, and so he decided to stage an operation of unprecedented magnitude. He would eliminate enemy intelligence agents in one massive swoop. Based on reports from a multitude of informers, he drew up a list of agents he called the particular ones, and he then met with the IRA's General Headquarters staff to finalise their targets. They settled on 35 different agents. Members of the squad would lead groups of men to different addresses scattered around the south inner city of Dublin and execute their targets. So on Sunday morning, 21st of November 1920, IRA men across the city disappeared into the maze of streets and alleys. Some of the attacks were successful, but some of them were botched. In total, 15 members of the British forces were killed, and the Cario gang had been decapitated. The men who were tasked with capturing or killing Michael Collins had been outmanoeuvred, and the response from the British was furious. They raided a Gaelic football match taking place in Croke Park that afternoon and massacred 14 civilians. Raids were carried out across the city. There were roadblocks and a curfew was imposed, and 2 men of the Dublin Brigade, Dick McKee, its leader, Peadar Clancy, were arrested, and they were then tortured and executed in Dublin Castle. Collins narrowly avoided capture. After a building he had been staying in was raided, he was able to escape and continue his intelligence war and the fight for Irish freedom.